Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Anyone taking to the stand in a courtroom would have to say these words with one hand on the Bible. This could be swapped to the Quran or the Torah, depending on your faith, and non-believers do have the option to promise to tell the truth without any reference to a text. But a powerful body of judges is considering whether to scrap this. The concern is that many giving evidence in criminal cases no longer take the oath seriously. The alternative is that all witnesses and defendants would promise to tell the truth without mentioning God, and would acknowledge that they could be jailed if caught lying. This will be debated this month by the Magistrates Association, and if voted through, the organisation's influential policy committee will draw up plans to be sent to the Ministry of Justice. The idea is that the new oath would be fairer for everyone and make it easier to understand the importance of what they're saying. But critics say that this further erodes Britain's Christian heritage. Whatever your belief or lack thereof, what are the consequences of removing religion, and in particular the Anglican faith, from civic life in Britain? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by the comedian, activist and atheist, Kate Smithwaite. Also here in the studio is Dr. Angus Patterson, who is a senior lecturer in theology and religious studies at the University of Winchester, and Andrea Williams, who's the CEO of Christian Concern. Welcome to you all. Kate Smithwaite, what do you think about getting rid of a Christian oath in our courtrooms?
Well, I think it makes complete sense. And it's interesting because we've already got a situation where people have choices, don't we? We've already got a situation where you can choose the Bible, you can choose the Quran, you can choose, and of course you can choose nothing, which is absolutely right, because it would be ridiculous to expect somebody who is an atheist or a Muslim, or a Hindu or whatever to swear on a book that patently means nothing to them. And at the same time, it's a little bit strange that we still have it at all, because I think, everybody is welcome to decide to tell the truth based on whatever religion they believe in. But to have that sort of put into courtrooms, I mean, it does seem anachronistic and out of date, doesn't it? And I think that we talk about the rolling back of religious influence on secular life, but actually we shouldn't have a compulsory religious influence on secular life. That's very much the point of secular life, is that, those who choose to follow a religion are welcome to do so. But what we shouldn't have is religion in our courtrooms. We shouldn't have religion in our House of Lords, which we do. We have 26 unelected bishops in the House of Lords who must be men, that's a very strange way of running your legislature. The only other country in the world, interestingly, that has a compulsory religious component to their government is Iran. And I think we make very strange bedfellows, as it were, if that's what we consider as our model for democracy. So I think it's quite obvious that there is a legacy, because of our history in this country, of religious organisations, and the Church of England in particular, being given a certain amount of privilege in public life. And we're seeing that being stripped away. It's not going to stop anybody who wants to from following the faith that they want to. It's not going to stop anybody from going to church or celebrating Christmas or Easter however they want. But it's going to mean that those of us who don't want that don't have to participate in it. I think that's absolutely right.
You mentioned anachronistic, but I suppose you could argue that the courts are anachronistic. I mean, they are, the oath, you could argue, is part of the court process. The judicial system is the wigs, the gowns. There's plenty of anachronisms there.
And Brendan, I'd be all in favour of scrapping all of those as well.
Okay.
I absolutely think that we should use our courts are there to determine who has committed a crime and who hasn't, and I think we should do that in the most effective way. And I quite agree with you that wig wearing isn't helping any more than saying prayers would. The reality is we should be focused on doing the job that, in the same way with our House of Lords, we should be focused on getting the best laws that benefit people in the UK, not on maintaining a legacy, a religious legacy.
Andrea, what's your view there?
I'm a barrister. I quite enjoy wearing my wig and gown. I think that we have to think, as Kate speaks now, what sort of safeguards would she put in place? And actually, in what she said just now, she's seeking to eradicate choice, because you're actually, at the moment, people are free to choose, and they can choose either to swear or by a religious book, or they can choose to simply affirm. So what Kate is wanting to do is to impose a new secularism, to eradicate belief from our systems. And I think that we need to think actually in the context of history and understand that our systems, our parliamentary systems, our legal systems are admired across the world. And why? Because actually their reference point is to something that's bigger, something that's out with our own humanity. We have to appeal to something greater that gives us morality, that holds us to account. If all we're doing is holding to our own sense of what might be truth, then truth can become relative. How do we actually ensure that truth is the same for one person as the other. This actually seeing ourselves in the context of something much greater, and this whole process as in the context of something much greater is really important.
But you're a lawyer, and just in practical terms, I'm interested in how much stock do witnesses and defendants take in swearing the oath?
Most people want to swear on the Bible, and I think that's very interesting that generally in life, at critical moments in life, even in this nation, and all the kind of polling seems to show that people actually want a reference point to something that is beyond our own human condition. And in God, there is comfort. And actually, we have to say here, our country and our great Christian heritage has served us abundantly well, and has served our parliamentary and our legal systems abundantly well, and has been followed across the globe.
Angus Patterson, the point is that you do have the option, actually, if there's no real need to remove an oath, do you think, or what's your view?
Absolutely. I think we have a good situation now. I'd be very concerned as a theologian that this doesn't become a fight about rights, that this doesn't become an opportunity for either Christians or atheists to assert their identities. I think the question has to be framed much rather as a question about the kind of public space we want to occupy. Do we want to occupy a public space which allows for people to do as their conscience dictates, which we have currently? And do we want a public space which allows the different kinds of truths to come into interaction, to come into debate? Kate started with one definition of truth, which is a very dominant definition of truth in our society, but I would resent the idea that our public life has to be reduced to that one definition. I would much prefer our public space to be a space of open conflict, and for religion not to be privatised, to be reduced to something that we do on one particular holy day for particular religions, but for our public space to be genuinely a place of interaction. If we move from a situation where we move from oaths and affirmations to just affirmations, what we would have, I believe, would be a hollowing out of our public space.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. We're discussing the role of Christianity in British public life. With me in the studio is the comedian, activist and atheist Kate Smurthwaite, Andrea Williams, the CEO of Christian Concern, and Dr. Angus Patterson, senior lecturer in theology and religious studies at the University of Winchester. A hollowing out of our public space. Okay.
Well, the thing is that people who are religious are absolutely welcome. I mean, almost every religion tells you that you should tell the truth in one way or another. A lot of them do anyway. I don't think anybody is suggesting that we shouldn't allow people to choose to follow the rules of their religion as long as they don't interfere with the rights and freedoms of everybody else. So we're not saying... It's weird. If you say to somebody in the street, oh yeah, I promise I'll meet you at 5:30, nobody whips out a Bible and says, quick, put your hand on this, I won't take your word for it. And I don't know anybody who's religious who believes that they only have to tell the truth when they've got their hand on a specific holy book. I think that what actually this is, it's not about people telling the truth. What it's about is having this special sort of privilege for religion that goes, and now there's a special part of the process where we do something a bit extra for religious people. And if I show up and say, actually, I've brought a copy of a different book, not a religious text, I've brought whatever I want to bring in, I'm not going to be allowed to swear on that. It's not a question of you can bring in any book. It's a question of there are certain books you're allowed to bring in, or you can have none. I mean, that in its own sort of strange and very slight, I agree, way is privileging religion. But I want to come back to the point that Andrea made about this idea that we need God and that we need religion in order to make our truth consistent. And I think that's very, very worrying. I think, first of all, that if you look back several hundred years, you'll see that most people in Britain thought slavery was fine, and indeed so did the church. And the fact is that what's right and what's wrong does change over time, and our views about these things do change over time. And actually, as a result, what the church does by trying to sort of codify and set in concrete, or set in stone, if you like, what's right and what's wrong, it means that our morality isn't able to move with the times. So we get a situation where in the 21st century, almost everybody in Britain is in agreement that gay people should have the same rights as straight people. And who is fighting against that? Only and solely a contingent of people who are doing that based on religion. And this is exactly it. It took a long time for the anti-slavery voices in the UK to get the churches to come on board.
That's absolutely wrong what you're saying, that it's the Christians that were promoting slavery at that time, or historically, it's the Christians that came back. And I think similarly, again, the kind of thing that you're saying now in this discussion is gay people. Everyone agrees that gay people should have equal rights, and it's only the Christians.
No, I said a very small minority of people driven by a religious ideology.
I think, let's look at the kind of things that are happening. This week I've been dealing with a teacher who's a rapper in South London. He was out on the streets doing some biblical teaching out on the streets. the headmistress of his school said, unless you take that YouTube tube down because it's religious and because it talks about homosexuality, you will lose your job. Our government has said your freedom to believe, to practice your faith, is your freedom to resign. That's actually the government submission to the European Court.
This is a wonderful point.
Right.
Andrea is now defending the right of an individual to work as a teacher and at the same time go out in the streets and tell people that it is wrong and evil to be gay.
No,
and to
never, never, it's
and to
never
distribute.
wrong. Excuse me, Kate, because no Christian ever will say that it is wrong to be gay.
Tell me
They
about
will
Westboro
say-
Baptist
they will
Church.
say-
Tell me about
they will
Westboro
say-
Baptist Church.
they-
Tell me about the people who stand in the
Kate.
street with a sign that says
Okay,
God
can
hates
we-
fags.
can we-
Can I-
okay.
And
can I
tell me
just- I
they
just
don't
want to
think it's
clarify
wrong to be gay
something
because they do, Andrea.
Okay,
They
can we
do.
just get back to the can we just get back to the point of can we
Don't sit here and talk to me about truth when this is the truth. This is a fact.
I guess the point that Kate is trying to make is that morality has changed over the centuries. Slavery, which was once perhaps some would argue sanctioned by the Bible, now clearly right-thinking Christians would abhor it. Okay, but the point is that can't Britain's judicial system adapt as well with the times? And in terms of this particular oath, perhaps a juror may not take seriously somebody who doesn't swear an oath on a book that they perhaps don't believe in. I mean, there are practical barriers to having a Christian oath in the courtroom.
First of all, I think there's a reality that people's concept of truth may change, but God doesn't change. And so and I think there's a sense to the kind of to the eternal, to something that is absolutely constant, that doesn't flip-flop. That's what's as kind of is the appeal of the oath. I would say certainly in the courtroom, nobody would say that somebody who affirms. We do see many people affirming as well as swearing by the oath. I don't think they're treated as sort of some second-class citizens in terms of the fear that you've just expressed. I think everybody takes the issue very seriously, whether by oath or whether by affirmation.
Let's say that it's not a Christian. We happen to be talking about swearing on the Bible, but if it's somebody swearing on the Torah or the Quran, may there not be some kind of prejudice amongst the jurors who may be slightly Islamophobic or whatever? Why not just take religion out of the equation altogether, and the jurors can simply judge on the evidence presented by the lawyers? Wouldn't that be better?
Well, I think that where society takes religion out completely, we've seen many examples in the last century of that happening. You end up in situations that are very chaotic, often very hurtful, often that lead to a tyranny. I mean, look at Pol Pot, Stalin. These have been regimes where God has been completely eradicated from the equation.
I mean, there was the case last week, two Christian guest house owners who were penalised for following a rooming policy based on their Christian beliefs about marriage and sexual ethics and so on. They're having their case heard in the Supreme Court. They were forced to pay a homosexual couple compensation for refusing to allow them a double room. This was in accordance with their married couples only policy. From your perspective, Andrea, it seems to me that you don't think that there is a balance between religious belief, homosexuality under equality law. You think one is favoured over the other, basically.
Oh, well, certainly what we've seen in the past decade is that where there is a conflict of rights between sexual orientation rights and Christian rights, sexual orientation rights trump the Christians' rights. So we've seen magistrates lose their job because they won't place a child with two mothers and two fathers. Paediatricians lose their job because they want to abstain when placing a children in a fostering situation. People have their licences removed. Counsellors have their licence removed because they believe that people can move away from the practice of homosexuality. We've had foster carers prohibited. I've done all of these cases, so I know them well. We've had foster carers prohibited from being in the process because they've said that they won't promote homosexuality. Even at Christian Concern, we wanted to run a conference on marriage and have actually a whole day's colloquium at the Law Society just across the road from these studios. And we were actually, our booking was unilaterally revoked, and we were told that we couldn't hold that because we breached the equality and diversity policy.
But it's not like you're being persecuted. It's just simply, I just want to bring back in, Angus, it's nothing to do with persecution. It's just simply these are the actions of a secular society. This has to happen to be fair to everyone. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. I think this is where I began by saying it's very tedious when these debates become fights about rights because we just slip into identity politics. Christians representing one identity, atheists representing one identity. And why I said something about the public space we share is because Christianity at its best offers a space for thinking about what it means to be secular. And that is a vision that transcends what we imagine to be most important to us, whether it be our Christianity, whether it be our non-belief. And I think that there's a danger that we sort of import American-type sort of culture wars into Britain, which don't fit and shouldn't have a space in the kind of politics that we want to have in this country. Yes, we can go through each and every case. I think bed and breakfast cases, we could raise all sorts of abhorrent religious behaviour. What we must do is we must attend to one another, be truthful about religion as well, because the risk of identity politics is that we just caricature one another's positions. Some people in religions, yes, do have a very fixed view of truth. Actually, from where I'm standing, all religions represent deeply complex layers of interpreting what truth is, full of people who are trying to work out what truth means in our very complex society. Let's allow space for these differences to honestly to meet.
And a key word there, I suppose, Kate, is identity. And a key part of British identity is the Anglican Church, whether or not you follow it or not. And certainly you can argue that, you can argue against having the King James Bible taught in schools, the Book of Common Prayer and so on. But these are intrinsic parts of British life and they still need to be valued.
Well, I don't think that anybody is suggesting that we should not allow children to see religious texts or whatever. I think absolutely, children need to learn the basics of all different religions. That children need to learn about what is the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism and what do Muslims believe and all this kind of stuff. Of course, there's a big difference between that and doing, unfortunately, a lot of schools and a lot of organisations do, which is telling children this is true, this is factual. However, that said, it really does look like in Britain that message, however firmly pushed, isn't really working. We know that only a quarter of young people in the 16 to 24-year-old range say that they believe in God. So we're in a situation where actually certainly a majority of young people growing up are not religious, have that stuff pushed on them.
The census from 2011, 2/3 of respondents did actually say that they were Christian or they had some kind of belief in Christianity, whether or not they were lapsed Christians or not.
There's quite a difference there between people being asked which group they identified with and having the choice of, Church of England, Catholic, etc., and at the same time being asked, do you actually believe in God? Which is quite a different question, actually. A lot of people are legacy Jewish or legacy Catholic or legacy, and that's quite different from people who actively think there's a heaven and a hell and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, I take your point, but I suppose the one analysis of that census is that people who identify themselves as cultural Anglicans, whether or not they go to church or not, it's a cultural aspect of Britain. It's part of the fabric of British life, and that should be respected.
Well, yes and no, actually, Brendan. The thing is that yes, of course, if people identify, if parents and young people identify as belonging to a certain group, I am absolutely not here saying, that you shouldn't sing some songs at Christmas or get presents or do whatever it is that you enjoy to celebrate your religion. But I think we should also be very careful about suggesting that this means that young people should quickly be pushed into a certain route. I'm sure we will talk a lot about faith schools, which are now being increasingly government funded, and there are rising numbers of faith schools. And at the same time, we could look at a part of the UK like Northern Ireland, where the history of having children divided at a very early age into separate, sectarian divisions in terms of schooling has been a driving force behind decades of bloody violence. And I think it's obvious that actually what we need to be doing is raising children in a way that teaches them about lots of different religions, but definitely does not privilege or push any particular viewpoint onto them.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. We're discussing the role of Christianity in British public life with Kate Smurthwaite, Andrea Williams and Angus Paddison. And it's not as if Christianity's being disenfranchised. I mean, Andrew, the point is that David Cameron said in March that he promised Christians that the government cares about faith despite clashes over gay marriage. Christian views are being taken into consideration when it comes to government policy.
Well, not if you listen to his submissions, the government's submissions that went to Europe with regard to the nurse who wore the cross, where it was said that the cross isn't a symbol of the Christian faith. That was a government submission. Or your freedom to believe in heterosexual marriage was your freedom to resign, that it doesn't flow from Christian faith. I mean, these are real things that we're having to deal with in the courts and at a policy level. Currently in the United Kingdom, on Friday, I was representing a chaplain currently undergoing a disciplinary process because of comments that she made on sexual ethics and faces dismissal for gross misconduct after working for more than 30 years in the NHS for one comment that was.
But that's not the fault of a secular society, though.
Well, what else is it? If you're increasingly not free to say certain things, if you are actually what's happening is that certain things are no-go areas. Christian Concern was its position on sexual ethics, its position on marriage was deemed to breach the equality and diversity policy of the Law Society. But deemed to breach. No, excuse me, Kay. Just let me finish. Deemed to breach the equality and diversity policy of the QE2 Conference Centre. And as a result of that, our conferences were cancelled unilaterally by them. So I think what's very important to say is that if you don't subscribe to the prevailing political orthodoxy, the prevailing secular orthodoxy, if you begin to challenge it, if you have a conscientious objection, if you believe a child needs two mothers or two fathers, you'll find yourself locked out of the public space. Now, this is only happening at the tip, but we at the Christian Legal Centre and Christian Concern see this daily.
Kate, quickly, your response to that, and then I'll bring in
the idea that you're being persecuted is completely ridiculous, Andrew. The reality is that
I didn't say we're being persecuted, but marginalised and discriminated against. Certainly my clients, that's what they're losing their jobs.
Because they are refusing to comply with the Equality and Diversity Act. And that act applies equally to absolutely everyone in the country. It applies.
It does not permit for Christian conscience. It does not permit for Christian conscience.
Just let Kate finish her point, please.
It should apply to absolutely everybody in the country. It's quite obvious that if we're going to have a law that says you can't discriminate on the grounds of gender, sexuality, etc., that law needs to apply to everyone. And amazingly, it actually doesn't, because the church is still allowed to insist on only women bishops. That any other organisation said, if Voice of Russia decided all our senior management must be men, well, you'd be closed down. You'd be closed down overnight, because we'd go, that's a discriminatory policy. And yet the church is allowed to persist in that policy. And there are various other places where the church is allowed to make an exception to the Equality and Diversity Act. And the good news is that there are one or two cases recently where they've been told, no, actually, bed and breakfasts, no, you're not allowed to just impose your anti-equality views on people who visit you. And that's great news. And what we need to see is that going right the way through, and an end to the all-male bishop situation. That's obviously, it's for 21st century, and here we are. Women can be barristers, women can be teachers, women can be doctors. Oh, but they can't be the best paid job in the church. It's wrong.
And bishops in the House of Lords, Angus Patterson, it's hard to get away from the fact that the church is inextricably linked with the state. The head of state is the Queen. She's the defender of the faith. Prince Charles wants to be known as defender of faith, I guess keeping in with our multi-confessional times, but there's no way of getting around it. The Anglican Church is alive and well. What do you think?
Absolutely, alive and well, and evolving in its understanding of its role as the established church. Religious groups, aside from the Church of England clamouring for those bishops to be removed, they understand that the bishops who sit in the House of Lords have a role to represent a transcendent viewpoint, a spiritual perspective, to interrupt conversations, to bring in their expertise in the ways that all the other members of the House of Lords do. And so what's sort of fascinating with the Church of England is that it doesn't actually work with a 19th century model of establishment. It's working out in 2013 what it means to be the established church. And I would far rather that situation than a situation where we simply say, with one heavy hand, the Church of England should be excluded from its position that it currently has. And I don't think privilege is quite the right word.
Of course it's the right word. Could we not have a situation, Angus? What would be wrong with a situation where the individuals who make the decisions about our country are elected by the people in this country? And of course those people can vote for Christians, for Muslims, for atheists, for Jewish people, whatever they want to vote for. They can vote for Zoroastrians if they want. However, that's an obvious choice. That's democracy. That's exactly what we constantly talk about wanting to bring to the rest of the world. And yet right here in the UK, we not only do we not have democracy, we have a situation where those of a certain religious belief are favoured, and furthermore where 26 seats are reserved for them in our upper chamber. And those seats, and this cuts me right to the core, those seats can only be occupied by men. Whatever I think, whatever I do, however hard I work in my life, there are 26 seats in the House of Lords that I simply cannot even aspire to.
No, I don't deny what you said about the lack of women, which undoubtedly is extremely awkward. I'm not for a second going to provide any response other than to echo exactly what you're saying. In terms of the bishops sitting in the House of Lords, we mustn't think that they're sort of those 26 men. Unfortunately, have some kind of massive voting power. In fact, they very rarely vote. What they do is contribute to debates on matters that they independently specialise in, and they inject into those debates, like all of the members of the House of Lords, their own particular perspective and expertise. And if we were to say that we wanted that to be abolished from our constitution, I think it might be an intention that's understandable, but the consequences would be harmful.
But the point that you were making, Andrea, is that the Anglican...
The consequences would be democracy.
That Christians are being marginalised. They're clearly not being marginalised if 26 bishops are in the House of Lords.
I just recounted to you my own story, but let's not even have my own story. The story of people who, as a result of following Jesus Christ, find that they're unable to either to access jobs, or that they're losing their jobs. In Christian Britain, a nurse of more than 30 years of nursing loses her job because she refuses to take off her confirmation cross, which she's worn since the very beginning. That's actually happening, all for holding to certain standards. Can I just also say that equality isn't all about being the same, and there is actually a theological perspective on women's bishops that talks about men and women being different, having different roles, complementarity.
Not necessarily on the gender issue, and I take your point on that, but in terms of having bishops, male or female, in the House of Lords, that's anti-democratic to Kate's mind, but it clearly shows that Christianity isn't marginalised.
They're in because of the historical perspective, and they're here because they've been there for centuries, and because actually at that point society invited the bishops in to be the spiritual lords, actually putting at the heart of our parliament something that society considered to be important. It was a mark of what society valued, and I think that when we begin to strip that away, when we no longer value that, when we have no reference point, because what the bishops point us to is the higher reference point, that we are something there is a sense in which things are greater, things are other than just our own condition, our own human condition.
Britain is changing, Kate, and Prince Charles making the point that he will be defender of faith rather than defender of the faith shows that he is moving with the times, and that the future head of the Anglican Church is actually taking into account the multi-confessional nature of British society. That's got to be positive.
We could all skip out of the room happily, couldn't we, on the news that the royal family is really bang up to date. What's difficult here is that, Andrea is justifying this religious privilege in society on the grounds of historical perspective, and unfortunately that leads us into a very unpleasant position, that if we say, well, it used to happen historically, so it must be good, then we should send small children up chimneys to clean them. The reality is that there were things we did in the past that were good and things that were bad, and we have to pick those things that are objectively good and do them and not do. So we invented democracy, brilliant, go us, and we should push for that.
So the argument for the House of Lords, the argument absolutely is linked to history, but it can't be conclusively answered by history. It has to be part of understanding religions as evolving, as adapting to their contexts, and actually having the voice of bishops, for example, speaking about benefit changes, is a voice that I welcome. So they don't say we're here because history has allowed us to be here. They say we're here and we're going to speak up for the marginalised
But they didn't
society.
actually stop it when they had the chance. When the welfare reform bill came through,
that would be
they didn't
undemocratic.
stop it.
Only 26
so either
of them.
you're saying...
No, I'm saying that in a public space there is a space for a bishop to say benefit changes are unjust, and I'm going to use my voice to speak up for the marginalised society. That seems to me
so
a
why
pretty
have we
good
given
way
them
to
these
use
seats?
a voice.
I want to finish by asking, Britain, the census seems to suggest that 2/3 of Britons consider themselves Christian. Are we still a Christian nation? Will that change? What do you think, Andrew?
I think here in Great Britain we have turned our back on God. We've turned our back on our history. We've turned our back on God in our laws, and this discussion kind of reflects that.
Angus?
We may no longer be a Christian nation. It's not something that keeps me awake at night, to be honest. What does keep me awake at night is if we lose the connection between God and truth. It seems to be something very important that's being said in that oath, and I want a public space that allows people to say there is a connection between God and truth. We should be very careful of good intentions having harmful consequences.
Sadly, we've run out of time. That's Dr. Angus Paddison, a senior lecturer in theology and religious studies at the University of Winchester. Also in the studio was Kate Smurthwaite, comedian, activist and atheist, and Andrea Williams, CEO of Christian Concern. Thank you for joining me, Brendan Cole, at the Voice of Russia in London.